Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you like this episode, please remember to hit the like button and leave a comment or two, then subscribe and click on the bell to receive notifications of whenever we release new videos. Also, please remember to share them to your social media. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to the woods of Alberta, Canada, to a place aptly nicknamed Crying Canyon. It is located on the eastern slope of the Canadian Rockies, and the alpine zone is guarded by granite peaks reaching almost 9,000 feet in elevation. Beneath the granite peaks are thick forests of pine, fir, and spruce trees, growing so close together that they look like a beautiful green carpet when you look across the valleys. There seem to be more white-tailed deer here than humans in nearby Calgary, and moose are plentiful too. If you look closely toward the mountaintops, you might see mountain goats as well as Canadian bighorn sheep as they perform their gravity-defying ballet along the cliffs. There are cougars, black bears, and wolves here, but the grizzly bears present the most danger of all. 32-year-old Jeremy Evans was raised in Calgary, which is only a stone's throw away. He was a meat packer and an avid outdoorsman. He'd been hunting and fishing nearly all of his life, and spent about 2 months of each year in the mountains pursuing his passions. He most enjoyed bow hunting, but this year he hoped to bag a big old ram, and that is best done with a hunting rifle. Jeremy was married to the love of his life, Joyce, and they had recently welcomed their first child into their family. She was his first girlfriend, and he was her first boyfriend. They'd been with each other ever since they began dating in high school, and were custom-made for each other. Joyce was a bona fide marine biologist and well-educated. She was a city girl, mostly, and Jeremy, her perfect complement by contrast. Joyce was still on maternity leave, but passed her time while volunteering at a local nonprofit when she wasn't busy taking care of the baby and Jeremy. Jeremy had planned on a dream sheep hunt for this fall and had put the time into researching locations and strategies to be successful. His meticulous planning for his hunts bordered on obsession, but his wife humored and supported him. Jeremy's sheep hunt was coming up soon, and he'd planned a quick scouting trip to find out just how much success awaited him in those dark forests and granite peaks. At 3 a.m. on August 17th of 2017, Jeremy hopped into his pickup truck and pulled out of his driveway. He'd carefully loaded his backpack and all the supplies he would need for what he planned to be a 3-day backcountry scouting trip for a trophy ram. Hiking into where he wanted to go would take an ordinary hunter a few days, so Jeremy sped this process up a bit by riding his mountain bike, which he placed in the bed of his truck. Jeremy knew from prior seasons that day hunters would hit the areas nearest the roads early in the morning, and that pressure would drive the sheep back to where he planned to hunt. He'd planned to set up base camp about 8 miles back up the trail, hoping that the head start on the day hunters would bring him success in his ram hunt. After driving for 3 hours to the trailhead, Jeremy slipped his backpack over his shoulders and pedaled up the hill. The foliage blurred by as an excitement of fulfilling the plans and goals he'd been working on started to take shape. His legs churned like pistons, driving him up and down each slope of the trail. Jeremy was so familiar with this area that he knew where the usuals would camp. He knew about 4 miles into his journey he would pass a sheepherder's tent with an older gentleman sipping coffee out front. But this time the old man was missing. Jeremy energetically zipped past a couple of men, possibly hikers, but maybe hunters, doing some scouting as well. They were on foot and taken aback a bit by seeing someone riding a mountain bike in this area. They stared at him as he passed, but he simply focused on finding the turn in the trail leading him to the more remote part of the canyon. This part of the canyon is so steep and rugged that few people make it back here. That is part of what drew Jeremy to this location. The ruggedness and solitude were exactly what he wanted. He brought along his binoculars in his backpack as well as his bear spray and high-powered hunting rifle. He carefully navigated the crumbling slopes of a few drainages and emerged to the open face of the mountain. The trees stopped suddenly, creating a panoramic view of the hillside. Jeremy picked his way slowly around the hill, glassing for sheep as he went. It wasn't long before his hard work paid off as a small herd of sheep appeared on the hillside opposite of him. Jeremy leaned up on his handlebars and used them as a steady rest to get a good look at the herd. He watched for several minutes, examining each individual and searching the males for that full curl set of horns so desired by a sheep hunter. As he adjusted his position a bit, he saw a small brown blur run across the trail just in front of him. He was far too experienced to wonder what it was, and instantly knew it was a grizzly cub. The most foreboding part was that where there is a grizzly cub, there is always a very protective and angry grizzly mama nearby. Fearful and profane words briefly flashed through his mind. He knew he was danger close to this cub, and that what came next could be disastrous for him. He knew if he was lucky, he may be able to get to his bear spray, still stowed in his backpack, now leaning on his mountain bike. As Jeremy bent down and opened the flap to his backpack, a few things he neglected to do flashed through his mind. He now regretted not loading his firearm and leaving his bear spray at the bottom of his pack instead of clipping it to his hip. Experience told him that missing these details is bad, but usually not crucial. His experience today would reveal just how crucial every little detail is when you're confronted by a grizzly bear. Before he could get his hand around the handle of his bear spray bottle, an ominous crack of a twig snapping just behind his right shoulder provided a clue to the question that plagued him. As he turned his head, he could see the sow grizzly in midair, her left paw outstretched toward him. The whites of her eyes conveyed rage, and her wide-open mouth clearly presented her violent intentions. Jeremy reacted lightning fast by grabbing his bike frame and positioning it between himself and the sow. As a hunter myself, I've played the mental gymnastics of the what-if game. If a bear surprised me, I would hold my bow out like a shield while stabbing with my arrows like giant daggers. It is kind of like the famous quote of Mike Tyson's, "Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face." Jeremy's plan actually seemed to work a bit. The sow's head went right through the frame of his bike, and her claws got stuck in the spokes of his wheels. As she struggled to remove herself from his bike, Jeremy held his backpack between them. I'm sure that he hoped that the confusion wrought by getting tangled up in the bike would cause the sow to retreat and reconsider her attack plan, but he could tell by the way she looked at him that that was not going to happen. With the bike frame wrapped around her neck, she again charged toward him. It was all he had at the time, so Jeremy used his backpack to crack the grizzly over the head several times. He used it as a shield to push her jaws away from him, time and time again. She was rapacious and determined to get to him, though. The protective sow somehow got the frame of Jeremy's backpack into her mouth, and the two had a very mismatched and brief episode of tug-of-war. Each time, Jeremy managed to somehow keep hold of his backpack. She bit through his hands and his backpack frame, while he fought her off for a few minutes. The sow then took a few steps back and shook off the bike frame. She turned away from Jeremy, appearing to go find her cub. As she backed up, Jeremy also backed up, all the while scrambling through his backpack, trying to get to his rifle. For no apparent reason, the sow spun on her heels. She came charging back toward Jeremy with renewed fervor. Jeremy hadn't yet got control of his rifle, so he threw his backpack at the sow. Thinking it better if he fled up the slope, then used the height to leap into a tree for escape, Jeremy sprinted as fast as he could. His jump into a spruce tree only granted him about 7 feet of separation from a sow grizzly probably nearly that high on her hind legs. As he pulled himself up into the tree, he felt the claws of the sow wrap around his right leg just before he could lift it out of her range. As she pulled his right leg toward her mouth, Jeremy powerlessly watched as her mouth opened wide and she plunged her huge canines into the flesh behind his knee. He braced to feel the flood of pain race through his body, but felt nothing. The sow jerked Jeremy out of the spruce tree and slammed him onto the ground at its base. He crawled under the spruce tree boughs to try to hide and wrapped himself around its trunk. His strategy worked, until it didn't. The sow was clawing at Jeremy while he clung to the spruce trunk, but could not get a good hold of him, at least not a good enough one to pull him out from under the tree. Jeremy was sheltered partially by the branches of the spruce tree, but she managed to push her head close enough to him to bite into the flesh of his left side. She jerked him out with such force that he could not stay wrapped around the base of the spruce and flew about 6 feet through the air. Now at this time, Jeremy weighed 250 pounds and was not a fat 250. He was strong and fit, and this sow not only broke the grip of his body curled around the spruce trunk, but also threw him a distance of 6 feet. Let that sink in for just a moment. As quickly as Jeremy impacted the ground, the angry sow was standing over the top of him. He lay curled into a ball on his right side, trying to protect his vital organs, head and neck, all at once. He tried to resist her as she pushed her open mouth around part of his face, but her power and speed were overwhelming. One of her upper canines punched its way through the inside corner of Jeremy's left eye socket, completely crushing his nose as it tore its path. At the same time, her other upper canine pierced Jeremy's flesh of the outside of his left eye. As she closed her jaws, the bones of Jeremy's face crunched and popped as she pulled the flesh away from the bone. Having his face torn from his skull, Jeremy decided that playing dead or non-threatening wasn't working. He rolled over onto his back and started throwing blows with the sow. He poked his fingers into her eyes, pulled her ears, and jabbed his fingers up into her nose. He was trying anything he could to get her to back off. His desperate strategies weren't enough to deter the sow, as she shook her head to break his grip and opened her mouth wide toward his face once again. As quick as he could, Jeremy plunged his left fist into her mouth and slid it past her leathery, scarred tongue. He opened his fist and grabbed her tongue as hard as he could. The sow immediately started gagging and choking. She turned toward Jeremy's left and pawed him with her hind paws while trying to get his fist from her mouth. As Jeremy grasped the bear's tongue with his left hand, he attempted to push her off of him with his right. His hand slipped along her fur to an area with thinner fur covering it, and he knew it to be her lower abdomen. He felt around and grabbed onto what he thought must be testicles and squeezed as hard as he could. This sow let out a sound reminiscent of a pig's squeal. It was high-pitched, painful, and had an element of surprise to it. The sow bucked and twisted, trying to get away from Jeremy's grip on such sensitive parts. After he released his grip, the sow ran into the bush and disappeared. Jeremy regained his feet and stumbled to his backpack. He knew he was in big trouble with such debilitating wounds. From his backpack he pulled his cell phone and immediately clicked a few photos of the damage the sow had done to his face. He grew concerned that he could see very large portions of his face missing, misaligned, or disfigured. His face was tattered and torn. Parts of his flesh dangled from unknown previous positions. He pulled his backpack close to him and gripped his rifle. Jeremy was so adrenalized that he even thought he could continue looking for sheep, but it wasn't long before it wore off and the pain set in. He began assessing his other injuries and noted that his right leg would not work properly. His tendons that operated his joints had been severed in several key places. On his left side he was missing a bare-mouth-sized piece of flesh, and the same on his inner thigh. As he loaded his rifle, due to his injuries, he placed the butt of the stock on the ground, with the barrel across his left shoulder, as he placed rounds in the gun's clip with his right hand. Suddenly his hands went limp, and he heard and felt crunching. The sow had returned from behind Jeremy, as he was distracted, loading his rifle. She'd crept up on him, and bit onto the width of the back of his skull, and crushed it. Jeremy could hear loud pops and crunches as his skull gave way to the enormous force of the sow's canines and jaws. Jeremy could see the scenery shifting as the sow worked to pull him up the hill. He was in a seated position and leaned against her front paws as she rested for a moment. The sow then reached up with her right paw and dug her claws into Jeremy's face, at his nose, and at the corner of his mouth. She peeled the skin of his cheek away, up to his right eyeball, and severed his ear completely. As she tore at his flesh with her claws, she continually bit at his face and skull, cracking and breaking bones. Jeremy stared into her mouth as she pulled chunks of flesh from his face. He started to feel a sense of peace come over him. He knew he couldn't live through all of this damage. As soon as he began to give in to death and accept his fate, the sow changed positions and dropped him onto his back. Whatever part of Jeremy's body that the bite to the back of his head caused to go out of whack, being dropped onto his back put it back in place. Feeling returned to his arms and hands. He could move them again. His vision was filled with something dark and blurry. He didn't know it at this time, but both of his eyes had been dislocated during this portion of the attack. Jeremy's head was now near the sow's abdomen, and her head was toward his feet. In one last burst of fight, Jeremy again grasped onto the portion of the bear's anatomy that he thought was testicles and began trying to tear them off. As he did this, he wrapped his legs around the neck of the sow. This inflicted obvious and tremendous pain on the bear, and she began bucking like a bronco, trying to separate Jeremy from her. The sow was in so much pain that she vomited and defecated, while she rolled on the ground, trying to shake herself from Jeremy's grasp. She was squealing like a pig and dragging him through the grass while trying to rub him off of her. At this point, Jeremy once again let go of the sow's sensitive anatomy and watched as she squealed and barked her way down the mountain in the opposite direction. Hoping that this time the sow would stay gone, but nearly completely blinded, Jeremy searched around with his hands, trying to locate his rifle. He knew she had dragged him uphill from his rifle and backpack a ways, so he crawled down to where he found the trail. Then he felt around and located his backpack, and finally his rifle. He was frantic and terrified the sow would return, and felt around to find his clip. His vision was so blurry that he couldn't tell what he was looking at, but spotted a dark linear object on the ground. He bent over to pick up what he thought was his clip, but turned out to be his severed mustache and goatee. Close to that, he picked up a piece of his ear and other parts of his scalp. Then he found the clip to his rifle. He shoved the clip into his rifle and fired 3 quick shots at a large dark mystery object nearby, just in case it was the sow. Jeremy was desperate, and certain there was no way he was going to live through this last part of the attack. He pulled his cell phone from his pocket and began to type a message to his wife. He knew he had no cell service, but thought of it as a type of message in a bottle that she may be able to receive someday after his death. Jeremy knew he had about 14 miles of rugged and difficult country to cross just to get back to his truck. As he tried to stand, his right leg gave out. The portion of flesh the sow had torn from his leg rendered it useless.
He looked down to see the hole the bear had torn in his side, open and bleeding. He had a moment of confusion and conflict. He wasn't sure if he should fight the inevitable any longer. There was simply no way he could make it out of this alive. He placed the butt of his rifle against the ground and tried to end his own suffering, but his rifle wouldn't fire. Amazingly, once the barrel cleared his head, it went off with a thunderous clap, like a giant judge rendering a verdict. He decided to take that as a sign that he needed to try to get out. Jeremy decided that if he made it easier to locate his body after his death, that would be an achievable goal. He aimed to make it as close to the trailhead as possible. Before he started to crawl, he took the severed pieces of his flesh he had picked up and placed them flesh-side down on the wounds of his face and skull. He then wrapped his entire head in a sweater to hold the pieces in place. He used the arms of the sweater to reposition his jaw, which was hanging from his face. Determined to make it closer to his truck somehow, Jeremy staggered to his feet, but his right leg buckled, and he collapsed. This process happened over and over as Jeremy continually tried to walk down the steep trail. At one point in the journey, Jeremy lost his footing and tumbled several hundred feet down the trail, landing on a small group of boulders. He had come to a stop in the creek at the bottom of the drainage. He was exhausted and in excruciating pain. Jeremy had decided that he would give up and wait to die in his sleep. Jeremy pulled his cell phone from his pocket and tapped on the screen. It looked like a cloudy jumble of images and letters. He just wanted to listen to some music as he drifted off to sleep and randomly clicked on a song on his playlist. When his little daughter was sick or scared, Jeremy would play the song Baby Shark for her on his phone. He'd saved it there so he could do just that, and now he drew inspiration to continue to fight for his life from this song he shared with his daughter so often. Jeremy crawled to the top of the drainage and tumbled down the other side. He picked himself back up at the bottom and crawled up the far side of the next drainage as well, all while the song Baby Shark was stuck on repeat. He mostly crawled, but managed to stumble several miles out to the trail junction, driven by the memories he'd had of his 6-month-old baby girl. About 7 miles into his escape, Jeremy approached the sheepherder's tent. He hoped that the 2 gentlemen he had passed earlier today on his mountain bike would be there. Jeremy's left eye dangled onto his cheek, and in order to see out of it, he had to tip his head back very far. He glanced about, hoping that someone would come to investigate the noise he made, but there was nobody there. He broke down and cried at the realization. Just past the sheepherder's tent, Jeremy had to stumble down another slope. He tumbled over 10 feet and landed in the creek, completely submerged. Undaunted, he crawled out of the creek like a zombie, still focused on his mission to survive and see his wife and daughter one more time. He crawled and stumbled down the trail to what he'd hoped to be his next chance of finding help. He staggered to the outfitter's tents pitched along the trail and searched everywhere for anyone to help him, but nobody was at this camp either. He couldn't believe no one was there and trashed the place looking for some kind of means of communications, a beacon or a satellite phone. Jeremy found a locked cabinet and thought it had to have something valuable in it. When he tried to pry off the lock, his hands wouldn't work, so he pulled it from the wall and smashed it on the floor. Once opened, he could see it contained only canned foods and a pocket knife and a case that resembled a cell phone. Every time he crossed another waypoint, it seemed his journey got longer and more difficult. By this point, Jeremy had several bear-mouth-sized bites removed from various parts of his body, most of the flesh slashed away from his face, as well as his skull crushed from both the front and back sides. He'd walked right around 11 miles from the initial attack site and fallen down the downhill portions of almost every hill he'd crossed doing so. He'd managed to stumble his way toward camps he expected to be occupied by people, only to have his hopes dashed each time he arrived. He was too tired to continue. Whether it was exhaustion, hopelessness, or just getting ready to die, Jeremy found a sleeping bag and rolled it out next to a wood stove at the camp. Before he lay down, he decided he would write a letter to the camp owners. He sat down at the table with paper and pen, but as he leaned over the table, his blood dripped onto the paper. Seeing some paper towels and toilet paper nearby, he took them in his hands and wrapped his entire head in the absorbent sheets. Somehow he found some athletic tape used to bandage sprained ankles of hunters and hikers, and wrapped that around his head as well. He then reached up to his dislocated and gashed jaw, which had hung from his face toward the left side of his body to this point. Jeremy pushed a few severed folds of skin back in place and pressed his jaw back into its socket. It clicked back into place, and he was overjoyed to be able to speak again. He finished off wrapping his entire head with the toilet paper, paper towels, and tape, and continued his note writing. A picture of exactly what Jeremy wrote and photos of his injuries would not pass YouTube standards, so I've posted them on my Patreon account linked below. I will urge you not to look at these pictures if you are sensitive or squeamish. They're actually some of the worst I've ever seen. Jeremy's deformed and damaged beyond human recognition, and you view them at your own discretion. While Jeremy penned his letter, he squirted juice from juice boxes into his mouth. This restored his energy, and he felt like he could make the 5 miles remaining to his truck. He had 5 remaining juice boxes, and that would be just enough for 1 for each mile. As Jeremy dragged his stiffened right leg for 4 more miles, he came upon a set of twin boulders and knew he was nearly back to his vehicle. He squished the contents of the last juice box into his mouth and kissed his hands before placing one on each of the twin boulders. He knew he would now make it back to his truck. The last mile was probably the easiest for Jeremy to navigate, given it was the least technical and most hopeful. As soon as he slid into the driver's seat, the first thing he did was rip the rearview mirror from the windshield. The last thing he wanted to see was what happened to him now. He was afraid it might dishearten him, so it just wasn't the time for it. That would come, but later in his journey. Although his vision was good enough for Jeremy to find his way back from Crying Canyon, it was nowhere near good enough for him to safely drive. Nothing was in focus, and everything lacked detail. He simply aimed his truck for the spot with the most light and figured the forest would be the darker areas, so he avoided driving into them. For over 12 miles of winding and treacherous gravel mountain road, Jeremy drove, his hopes and optimism welling up as he got closer and closer to rescue. It had been about 8 hours since Jeremy had been attacked by the Sow Grizzly. He pulled into the remote family-run outfitting company at the Panther River Resort. As he parked his truck and stepped out, resembling something like a low-budget movie zombie, he could see a child's face disappear from the big window in the front of the building. He stumbled over to the door and heard a child say, "Grandma, someone's trying to prank us." The little face he had seen disappear from the window had apparently spent a few seconds in some kind of panic in reaction to Jeremy's appearance, and had decided it was all a joke of some sort. Jeremy immediately explained how he'd been mauled by a bear, and this was no prank. He quickly passed the boy's grandparents his wallet and cell phone and requested they call his wife and tell her. Jeremy's wife, Joyce, was helping out at a non-profit when her cell phone rang. She was driving, so she ignored it at first. But as it rang, she could see it was coming from an unlisted number. This is frequently how the police call people, so she picked up the call to see what was going on. As their relationship entered previously uncharted waters, Jeremy and Joyce searched for what was their next step. She was wrought with confusion and worry, while he was asking for a glass of room-temperature water with a straw to relieve his thirst. At the Panther River Resort, the family of caretakers did exactly that. They took care of Jeremy by calling for the Shock Trauma Air Rescue Service. STARS, as it's called, is a Canadian nonprofit helicopter air ambulance service operating out of Calgary who transports critically ill or injured people to care. The resort had a planned wedding ceremony at their site scheduled for that day, so the owner helped Jeremy get back into his truck and drive around the backside of the building as they waited for the air ambulance. Jeremy couldn't help but notice that the 18-year-old girl who was helping take care of him would banter with him but never look him in the face. His wounds were overwhelming to her, and he could see it in her behavior toward him. After being told that the STARS service wouldn't be able to respond to Jeremy's predicament within a predictable time frame, the owner of the ranch decided to fly Jeremy to the hospital in his own helicopter. Jeremy tried to get his fishing rod from the back of his truck to try and catch some bull trout while waiting for the rescue to be organized, but was convinced to sit down and rest instead. The young woman rode with Jeremy in her dad's helicopter as he flew them to Sundry and the medical support team waiting there. The entire flight, the young woman continually poked Jeremy in the side to keep him from passing out, while holding a tarp to catch the blood seeping from his wounds. As soon as the helicopter landed, Jeremy could see several blurry shapes of people waiting to help him. When Jeremy said hi to them, they immediately began shuffling and preparing to take care of him. His right leg was now even more stiff than it had been up to this point, and it was propped over a seat in order to fit him into the helicopter. They struggled to remove his large frame from such a tight fit, but Jeremy slowly walked off the helicopter under his own power. Jeremy was loaded into the ambulance and endured another 90-minute ride to a more supportive Calgary hospital. As they drove, one of the doctors had to hold Jeremy's head up and off of the gurney. The crushed portion of his skull was too fragile to bear the bumps and jostling of the drive otherwise. En route, they tried to intubate Jeremy, but weren't sure how to do it, given he was missing his nose and a good portion of his mouth. He was breathing through wound channels torn open between his eyes, and once he was laid flat, he couldn't see anything. Before allowing the medical team to put him under sedation, Jeremy insisted he be allowed to tell his mother and wife goodbye, as he was afraid he might not wake up. He had a nurse place a towel over his head to hide his wounds as he spoke with Joyce. She could see one of his green eyes misplaced and wondered if he would survive. Once he was wheeled away, the medical team completed some x-rays to understand the destruction to his skull and facial bone. They also completed a CAT scan to assess the bleeding on his brain. They blocked his head in place and repositioned his eye to allow him to see better. One of the doctors leaned over Jeremy, and he could see she had green eyes like his. He asked her to hold his hand, and she gladly comforted him. Just before being put under sedation, Jeremy heard a man with an Australian accent reassure him by telling him, "I'm down here at your feet. I got you, buddy," as he rubbed Jeremy's feet to reassure him. Jeremy remembered many details of the procedure. He said he remembered them placing the breathing tube down his throat and was aware as the initial crews stitched up his wounds in his hands and leg. As the surgeons marveled at how tough Jeremy was, they were even more amazed to find out he had done exactly what needed to be done to preserve the tissues torn from his body during the bear attack. The act of placing the severed tissues into the open wounds actually preserved their viability and allowed them to be reattached to his face. The initial surgery lasted 13 hours, but that would not be the only surgery he would have to endure. Jeremy was placed into a medically induced coma for the day to keep him stationary and rest while he healed. The next day Jeremy awoke, but couldn't see anything. He could hardly hear anything. Swelling had made his head feel like a balloon, and undoubtedly concerned his wife and friends who visited him. In some ways, sleep was worse than being awake. Each time he drifted off to sleep, he was terrified back to consciousness by a dream about the attack. It seemed like the trauma from that confrontation would never end. Jeremy was suffering from PTSD from the attack immediately. Each time he would wake up, the hospital staff would try to restrain him, which reinforced the flashback. He imagined it was the bear pinning him down all over again. The medical staff had Jeremy up and walking very soon. They knew he had to move his body to keep his blood circulating and joints articulating, or he might develop complications. Jeremy passed the time by writing Joyce love letters whenever she was absent from his side. When friends visited Jeremy in the hospital, the staff would help him go outside for walks. Each time he saw a bush or a spruce tree or any darker shape, he froze and refused to go near it. He remained in the hospital for 5 weeks, 8 hours, and 23 minutes. And yes, Jeremy kept track of the time. During his stay there, the staff worked on helping him regain basic function in his legs and arms and deal with the mental trauma of the attack. It would probably be no surprise to anyone hearing this story, but Jeremy returned to the scene of his attack 2 days after being released from the hospital. He took Joyce hunting with him. They bagged a couple of birds while out and visited the lodge staff to let them know he was okay. Within a week of being released from the hospital, he went deer hunting with one of his buddies. They ended up bagging a white-tailed doe and a bull elk. Returning to his normal habits and passions was therapeutic for Jeremy, and his wife and friends became his informal therapists and support staff. Joyce laid down some pretty restrictive ground rules for him, though, as a condition of letting him go back into the woods. She said he had to bring a satellite phone with him that would allow him to send texts from anywhere in the world. It was a very moderate and slight concession on her part, but was important to help Jeremy recover. Jeremy went back to work at the beef slaughterhouse 7 weeks after the mauling. He would have flashbacks while at work. One day his sense of smell suddenly returned, and the scent of blood sent him reeling. His psychiatrist recommended he try rapid acceleration treatment, and after a single 45-minute session, he was able to sleep for an entire night for the first time in a long time. Jeremy has continued to push the boundaries on his healing and confronting his fears resulting from the attack by returning to his attack scene every once in a while. Joyce says that the biggest takeaway from this experience is that life is fragile and precious. Jeremy and Joyce now have a greater value for their family and time together, growing closer with each other. Their story together is recounted in a book titled Mauled, Lessons Learned from a Grizzly Bear Attack, and is linked below for your review. On the cover is a picture of Jeremy after his face was reconstructed. The book discussed different aspects of his attacks in much more detail than presented in this episode. If you would like to show support for Jeremy by purchasing his book, I'm sure he would appreciate it. Wow, if you described this story secondhand to me, I wouldn't believe a single word of it. But this story's true, and straight from Jeremy's own account. If any of you are from Calgary and see Jeremy in town, make sure to buy him a beer or two. After reading the details of this attack, I have a few questions for you. Do you think the sow continually returned to attack Jeremy because she could not find her little cub? Would you have been able to grab onto the bear tongue while squeezing sensitive areas of her anatomy to survive? I honestly don't think it would have crossed my mind. How strong do you think a person has to be to have their head and face crushed, but still manage to make it to help? Will you play the song Baby Shark next time you need motivation? Do you think the sow grizzly that attacked Jeremy had PTSD from getting her sensitive bits squeezed so hard? I will gladly read and respond to your thoughts, so please post them in the comment section below and let's talk about it.
Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to a remote trail system near Ramsay Arm on the west coast of British Columbia, Canada. The inlet to Ramsay Arm is the Quadam River, which offers prime timber for lumber harvesting. The area is a coastal mountain range and part of the temperate rainforest that runs from northern California to southern Alaska. The islands and inlets here are covered in dense stands of fir, spruce, and cedar trees that completely cover the hills and mountainsides. The common animals in this area include black-tailed deer, moose, and Roosevelt elk. The predators in this area include cougars, coyotes, wolves, as well as black and brown bears. On the day of Monday, July 19, 2019, 44-year-old Colin Dowler was up riding and hiking along the Ramsey Arm Trail system. Colin was originally from Quadra Island, which is just north of the town of Campbell River. He worked as the maintenance manager at the Vancouver Island Health Authority and was trained as an electrician. Colin was a big fan of being outside and being very fit. He was in great shape and smaller in size, but strong. He suffered from a congenital knee disorder, but didn't let it hold him back from doing what he loved. Colin's family had generational ties to the land. A 7,000-foot-high mountain was named after his grandfather as Mount Doogie Dowler, and it looks very similar to a bare canine tooth. His plans were to ride his mountain bike to the base of the trailhead up Mount Doogie Dowler, make the hike to the summit, and spend the night there. Then he planned to return on roughly the same route and end his short adventure with fond memories of the trip and his grandfather. A few weeks before, in June, Colin had made an exploratory trip to the area and decided to return for an overnight trip to Mount Doogie Dowler. He had spent enough time in the area to learn that he wouldn't be able to run up and climb the mountain and return in one day, but learned the particulars of this trip that would help him be successful on his next outing. Upon learning of Colin's plans to boat to an obscure inlet and then bike up a logging road to camp by himself, his wife of 16 years, Jen, expressed some concern. Colin allayed her fears by saying if he wasn't back by 8 p.m. on Monday night, she could start worrying then. The day before, on Sunday, July 18th, Colin had made his way to the logging camp on the Quatam River by boat. He had approached occupants of the camp and asked for directions to a road that would take him to Mount Doogie Dowler. The camp cook, Vito Gayandrea, asked him if there was anything he needed, and Colin indicated he had forgotten to buy bear spray on his way to the boat launch. Vito did him one better. He gave Colin a canister of bear spray, then helped him load his backpack and mountain bike into the back of the company truck and drove him to the old logging road. After executing the first half of his plan, Colin was about 2 kilometers into the return trip when his attention was stolen from taking in the amazing views. He glanced up the logging road he was riding down, and about 100 feet ahead of him a huge brown bear was slowly walking toward him. It was making eye contact, and was clearly not surprised at his appearance so close to it. Now, every time Colin had seen a black bear or a grizzly in the wild before, it had turned tail and ran in the opposite direction. This bear clearly didn't do that, and that was very worrying. Colin was concerned at seeing the bear, but his concern grew when the bear continued to amble toward him. He reached into his pocket to pull out his bear spray, but it was missing. At some point in the journey, he had lost it along the trail. The bear's head was at a normal walking height, and it was walking at a normal pace. It stared at him as it approached him. It didn't growl or be overtly aggressive toward him as it closed the distance on him. As the big bear approached within a few feet, Colin positioned his bike between the two of them. He moved off the trail a few feet to allow the bear room to pass by him. He tried to soothe the bear with calm speech, telling the bear that he was no threat and that they didn't have a problem with each other. As the bear walked past Colin and his bike, as soon as its rear end passed the rear tire of Colin's bike, it lowered its head, spun toward him, and tried to approach him from behind. Colin reacted and quickly turned to keep his bike between them. The bear jumped a bit with the sudden movement. Colin backed up slowly and continually pushed the bike toward the bear as a barrier between him and its claws and teeth. The bear pushed at his bike with its paws, gradually increasing its force with each push. It swatted his bike in stark communication of its intentions toward him. Colin then thought of distracting the bear. Perhaps it had smelled the food he had in his pack. He removed his backpack and tossed it a few feet, but still between them and off the side a bit. The bear sniffed the backpack briefly, and then continued its slow and steady stalk toward him. After his bike and backpack had no effect in distracting the bear, Colin decided to use a more forceful means of persuading the bear to find easier prey. He took his hiking pole, banged it on the frame of his mountain bike, and yelled. He hoped to make enough noise to drive the bear away. Next, he poked the bear right between the eyes with his hiking pole. He poked and prodded at the bear, trying to threaten it into leaving him alone. The bear simply bit onto the pole and tried to wrestle it from Colin's grasp. After swatting the hiking pole out of its way, it continued to slowly stalk Colin. Colin thought that perhaps the bear needed a more convincing implication for its aggressive behavior. He picked his bike up over his head and hurled it toward the bear, hoping the sprockets or pedals might inflict a painful injury to the bear, convincing it to leave him alone. The bike simply bounced off of the bear, and it ominously stepped over Colin's only remaining means of defending himself. By now, the bear was only a few feet from Colin. It wrapped its paw around his waist and pulled him toward its wide-open mouth. He watched in terror as the bear clamped its enormous jaws onto the side of his abdomen, just above his left hip. Colin could feel his own hot blood pouring down his own skin. Colin felt helpless as the giant bear carried him like a dog carrying its favorite toy. He hung from its mouth, suspended by the flesh of his side, as it lumbered toward the edge of the road. It was clearly focused on taking the man into the bushes and killing him there. As the bear carried Colin the 50-foot distance off the edge of the road, he kicked his feet, gouged it in the eyes, and twisted and peeled its lips back, trying to force it to drop him. As he reached for the bear's lips again, the bear swiveled its head and chomped onto his hand, fending it away. After carrying him to the shoulder of the road, the bear began tearing chunks of flesh from Colin's side, hip, and upper left thigh by biting him and tossing its head back and forth. Each time it bit him, Colin would shriek in pain. The massive bear laid across Colin's body to hold him still while it chewed and ripped at the flesh on his side and hip area. He could hear the bear's teeth grating on his femur and hip bones as it tore his flesh with its teeth. He could see the bear's huge yellow teeth as it chewed and drooled into his wounds. At that point, Colin decided to play dead and went limp. This did nothing to stop the bear from tearing and biting his flesh. The bear simply continued to chew on him, and clearly never viewed him as a threat from which it had to defend itself. It viewed him as food from the first moment it saw him and was now feeding on him while he was still alive to feel all of it. As the bear repeatedly bit his hands and feet, Colin's mind flashed to his family. He thought of his wife and their kids. It was then that he remembered a recent gift he had received from his father. It was a pocket knife manufactured by Buck Knives with a small 2 3/4-inch blade. He reached both hands underneath the bear and into his pocket to retrieve the weapon from his pocket. After several attempts to retrieve the knife, he was finally successful at pulling it from his pocket. Colin quickly unfolded the short blade and reached underneath the bear toward his left hip. From beneath the bear, Colin plunged it into the bear's neck. The stab had sunk into the bear's flesh to the entire length of the small blade. Blood poured from the bear's neck wound, and it seemed surprised at the injury Colin inflicted so quickly. Colin yelled out, "Now you are bleeding too, bear!" The bear dropped Colin and retreated a few meters and stared at him. Colin wanted him to come back so he could stab him a bunch more times. The bear was in obvious distress and defecated and urinated as a sign of it. The bear seemed to be re-evaluating its attack on Colin, who watched as blood trickled from the gaping wound in the bear's neck. It was clearly struggling to breathe. It glanced toward Colin, then at his bike, and back toward the bush from where it had emerged. It occurred to Colin that he and the bear were now watching each other die. As the bear looked things over, Colin used his pocket knife to cut his shirt sleeve loose from his shirt. He quickly wrapped it around his left thigh and tied it off in a makeshift attempt at a tourniquet. As soon as Colin glanced back toward the bear, it was gone. Colin used this time to scoot on his butt back toward his mountain bike. He used the bike to help him regain his feet and struggled to straddle his only means of escape. As soon as he tried to pedal, he wrecked his mountain bike. He repositioned himself and tried again. His return route was uphill for a short distance, and he pushed himself along with his uninjured leg. He dug deep for the energy to find his way to help, driven by the thought that he may live, albeit as an amputee. Colin had a 5-kilometer downhill ride back to the logging camp, and the help he hoped he would find there. If he were uninjured, this ride would have taken him just under half an hour, but with his left leg and hip so grievously wounded, he made much slower time than that. After his arrival at the logging camp, Colin crashed his mountain bike into the mess hall steps. His timing couldn't have been better, as it was lunchtime. He screamed, "I have been attacked by a bear! Call a helicopter!" A handful of logging camp workers emerged from the mess hall. As it turned out, all 5 of the men were trained in first aid just the week before, to Colin's benefit. They dragged him inside the mess hall and immediately got to work to stop or slow his bleeding. One of the responders was the camp cook, Vito Gianandrea. As the loggers looked Colin over, Gianandrea noticed a huge chunk of flesh he described as the size of a T-bone steak, missing from Colin's kidney area. He was quoted as saying that the loggers could see things a person is not supposed to see in regard to Colin's injuries. The loggers contacted emergency services using a satellite phone, and a medevac helicopter was dispatched to the logging camp. The medevac service had just recently been cleared to carry blood for transfusion on board, of which Colin was one of the first recipients. This was the first time the medevac pilot, Kalani Polson, had ever transported a bear attack victim to the hospital. As he lifted one of the bandages, applied by the loggers, he stared at the 6-inch by 6-inch gaping wound the bear had left in Colin's side. He stated that he could see Colin's kidney and adrenal gland through the wound. The paramedics immediately began a blood transfusion before putting Colin on the medevac helicopter. One of the loggers held the blood bags for Colin as the helicopter made its way to the hospital. Colin was whisked to Vancouver General Hospital, which is one of the finest trauma centers in the nation. He was being treated there within 70 minutes of arriving at the logging camp, which clearly gave him a better chance of survival. Colin's wounds to his hip, side, and thigh were severe and took painstaking physiotherapy to only partially recover from. The pictures of his wounds would definitely not pass YouTube standards, so I have posted them on my Patreon, linked below. If you choose to look at them, just be warned, they are very graphic and horrific. The proud Canadian boasted that his entire experience was an example of Canadian healthcare at its finest. He was grateful for the care and attention from all of the medical professionals who cared for him at the hospital. It took Colin 2 years to recover enough to run in a half marathon in September of 2020, despite his doctors telling him he would never walk normally again. To say the guy is persistent and tough is a gross understatement. Colin has admitted that his lengthy recovery has been disappointing at times, but he marvels at the fact that he has progressed so much since the attack. Colin's wife of 16 years, Jen, stated that she was just grateful that he is so stubborn. She was also very grateful to the logging camp workers for being so reassuring and helpful to her husband when he needed them. In the days after Colin's attack, conservation officers tracked the brown bear down. As they neared the location they thought the bear was at, the bear had quietly crept to within a few yards of the conservation officers, unbeknownst to them. One of the conservation officers picked up the bear's scent on the breeze and turned around to see the bear before it closed in on the officers. A second armed officer was alerted and turned around just in time to dispatch the human-hunting brown bear. Upon examining the brown bear's tracks, the conservation officers determined that the bear had been stalking them for about 30 minutes, the whole while they thought they were stalking it. The bear was examined and found to be a 4 or 5 years old male. It weighed about 350 pounds, was about 9 feet in length, and was found to be in healthy condition. The grizzly also bore a neck wound from Colin's knife, which made them certain they had killed the grizzly who attacked him. The authorities deemed Colin's attack as a strictly and clearly predatory bear attack. Colin summarized his feelings about the attack by stating he is comfortable being the badass dude who took on a grizzly bear with a pocket knife and won. He states that focusing on the awesomeness of the experience and his survival supersedes the bad parts. In British Columbia, authorities estimate that there are about 15,000 grizzly bears and somewhere between 120 to 150,000 black bears. Authorities receive somewhere between 14 and 25,000 calls each year that report bear sightings or conflicts. They state that most of these calls are human-caused problems that are antagonized by improper storage of garbage or leaving out food or barbecue grills which tempt the sensitive noses of bears. Very few of these calls lead to bears being killed due to presenting a danger to the public. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I am left with a few questions for you. Do you think if Colin hadn't lost his bear spray, it would have prevented his bear attack? Why do you think a healthy, young male grizzly would decide to stalk, kill, and eat a human being? What else do you think Colin could have done to avoid this bear attack? Do you think the behavior of the bear should have been interpreted as predatory behavior? I will be glad to read and answer your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below and let's talk about it. Thank you for watching. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to a place just north of Calgary, Alberta, Canada. The small town of Water Valley is not exactly prime grizzly territory. In fact, this area is not even in the mountains. The location is seated on the western edge of the plains that cover central Canada, but there are vast forests of maple, oak, pine, fir, and spruce trees around town. The terrain is rolling hills and is called the foothills of the Canadian Rocky Mountains. Deer, elk, caribou, bison, and moose nibble the plant life, and coyotes, wolves, and grizzly bears are known to roam this area searching for prey. On May 25, 2021, 68-year-old Barbara Collister was preparing to go for a walk near her home. She had an acreage on the edge of the town with private trails meandering within its boundaries. She enjoyed hiking on the trails and was the first woman to graduate with a master's degree in business administration from the University of Calgary. She parlayed this degree into a career as a project manager for the Alberta Health Services and retired in 2016. Barbara was known by her friends and family as a loving and kind person with a beautiful soul. She was born on February 5, 1953 in Dinsmore, Saskatchewan, and was the second child of her proud parents. She and her husband, Doug, had lived at their 114-acre property on Owl Ridge for 32 years and enjoyed nearly every minute of it. They later dedicated the property as a nature conservancy. On the day in question, Barb was out for a hike on her property. She had never had problems with bears in this area, so she felt safe hiking without bear spray or a firearm. She enjoyed hiking and being outside in general. As she was hiking along the trail, she had no idea of what dangers lurked in the bush near her. She came around a small bend in the trail and could see a huge grizzly bear closing on her from a short distance. She watched as its shimmering coat shook with each stride as it bounded toward her. Her last memories were of watching the bear's claws dig into the soil as it streaked toward her. At about 7 p.m., a call came into the local police office. The caller was reporting a dead woman and wanted to have the police come investigate and recover the woman's body. After arriving at the scene, the police officers noticed that Barbara was in fact dead and had been buried in a bear's food cache. When a bear hunts a human for food, it kills them, then covers the corpse in duff and sticks to keep other animals away from it. They protect these food caches with their lives sometimes, and are known to be aggressively defensive of their food sources. The grizzlies in this area do not have the benefit of a seasonal salmon run like the bears in the Canadian Rockies a short distance away. If they are not strong enough to migrate west to claim and defend a salmon fishing spot, then they have to find food near them. This forces them to wander far and wide in search of enough calories to pack on the weight they will need to survive hibernation. As you can imagine, this takes a toll on the bears and creates a desperate situation for older, less mobile bears. Desperate grizzlies rarely make good company to human beings. As the authorities investigated Barbara's death, they placed culvert traps in the area and monitored the area for bears moving through. They also posted warning signs and public notices to warn visitors away from the location. They followed up on reports of a sow with a single cub in around Barbara's acreage. They caught 2 female bears over the next few days and hoped that one of the bears they had caught would be found to be Barbara's killer. The first sow that was caught in the culvert traps was found to be a younger, healthy grizzly with a single cub. The authorities pulled DNA evidence from her claws and fur to analyze for Barbara's DNA evidence on the bear. After the analysis, this sow was removed from the authorities' list of bears who may have killed Barbara. She and her cub were released to a new location farther away from human settlements. The older sow was also scrubbed for DNA evidence on her claws. After analysis, she was found to be the bear who killed and cached Barbara. She was immediately euthanized, and her body was analyzed in a necropsy. She was found to be lactating but did not have cubs, as the amount of milk she was able to produce was not sufficient to feed a cub. She had rotten and worn-down teeth and was very advanced in age. Her frame was large but was well past her prime, losing a substantial portion of her muscle and fat due to age. Shortly after catching the 2 sows and the cub, the authorities removed the culvert traps and rescinded public warnings to avoid the area. After reviewing the manner in which Barbara's body was partially buried, authorities were conflicted. The fact that the bear had buried her body was a telltale sign of a predatory attack. Later they revised their decision, though, and classified the attack as a defensive attack. They believed that Barbara had surprised the bear in such a way that the bear acted in self-defense initially, but then decided to cache her remains for consumption later. Barbara's attack occurred just 24 kilometers from where the grizzly bear attack on David Lertzman occurred. We covered his attack on this channel previously, and it is linked below if you would like to review it for comparison. While looking at the grizzly bear attack statistics in Alberta, I couldn't help but notice that the trend line for these attacks has increased substantially over the last 20 years. From the period of 1958 to 2022, there have been 18 fatal grizzly attacks with an uptick in the last 22 years, indicating 7 fatal bear attacks there. That puts 40% of fatal grizzly attacks in the province having occurred in the last 22 years. Statistically, bear attacks on humans have increased by an average of 1 per year to a total average of 3 bear attacks in each of the last 3 years. Many people attribute this uptick in bear attacks to an increase in people traveling into the backcountry, but that doesn't diminish the obvious threat posed by bears to visitors. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I have a few questions for you. Do you think the grizzly bear attack on Barbara Collister was a predatory or defensive attack? Did the age and poor condition contribute to factors leading to Barbara's attack? Do you think this attack would have been avoided if Barbara would have been carrying bear spray? Would a firearm have changed the outcome? I will be glad to read and reply to your thoughts, so please post them in the comment section below, and let's talk about it.
Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider clicking on the like button and clicking on the bell icon. We'll help you know when we post our new episodes. Posting our video links to your social media profiles furthers awareness, and it's fun. We slashed our prices in our merch store, linked below, so check out the bargains there while you shop. As a member of our human community, remember to adventure bravely and be careful out there, especially in bear country.